course, the story of Dune is one of the most complex and engaging characters we have ever seen. Paul Atreides is many things to many people, with some seeing him as a classical hero, while others see him as a villain, the harbinger of death and destruction. It is in this duality where I think Paul truly shines as a protagonist. Because we get to experience the story from his perspective, we are able to sympathize with him and understand that in many ways, he is a victim of terrible circumstances. In my opinion, Paul is the best character in Dune, as his reluctant rise is incredibly interesting and thought-provoking. In this video, I will look at Denis Villeneuve's Dune movies in depth, and discuss what makes Paul such an interesting and compelling character.
I had a vision. My eyes were wide open.
Paul is interesting right from the very beginning. And when I say the very beginning, I'm talking before he is even born. Paul is the son of Duke Leto Atreides, one of the leaders of the Great Houses. His mother is Lady Jessica, a Bene Gesserit sister. The Bene Gesserit's mission was to create a being called the Kwisatz Haderach, a person with the mental abilities to bridge space and time. The Order had been carefully mixing bloodlines to reach this ultimate goal. They tasked Lady Jessica with securing the Atreides bloodline by having a child with Leto. Lady Jessica carried out her task, but deviated from the Bene Gesserit's instructions. She was told to have a girl, who would be raised as a Bene Gesserit sister and be bred with Fade Rotha Harkonnen to create the Kwisatz Haderach. Out of love for Leto, who wanted a son, and her own belief that she could produce the Kwisatz Haderach, Jessica decided to have a son instead, Paul. This change did not sit well with the Bene Gesserit, as it ruined century-long plans, making their desired outcome much more difficult. The Bene Gesserit didn't just want to create the Kwisatz Haderach for the sake of it. They wanted to create him so that they could control him, and use his prescience to achieve the outcomes they wanted.
The question is, can we control him?
Paul's very creation is seen as an act of defiance in the eyes of the Bene Gesserit, something that mars their opinion of him as a prospect. He is further estranged from them as he has very little to do with the Order save for his mother, leaving him to form his own opinions of them. He is raised as heir to House Atreides, and puts much of his attention in emulating his father as best he can. He is still very much a boy at the start of Dune, and has his own self-doubts about whether he can be a good heir to his house or be a leader.
What if I'm not Dad? Not what? The future of House Atreides.
His loyalty is to House Atreides, as we see that Paul cares deeply for those who serve his house, growing attached to them and seeing them as family.
Bernie Halleck and Duncan Idaho are close allies of Duke Leto. Did feel like big brothers.
Even though he focuses on his role to House Atreides, he is also being trained to master Bene Gesserit abilities by his mother. While Paul loves his mother, they have a complicated relationship, as she represents a part of him that he would prefer to ignore. Whether he wants them or not, these abilities are a part of him, as he has prophetic dreams and can use the voice. He seems reluctant to use these powers, no doubt frightened by what they can do and what they mean for him. They almost feel like more of a burden than a blessing to him, especially as the visions start to increase in number and accuracy. I think he also feels some resentment towards his mother, seeing her as the cause of his unnatural abilities.
You did this to me! You Bene Gesserit made me a freak!
I think it's very telling that he tells Duncan about his dream, but lies when his mother asks him about it. I think this also somewhat colors how he views the Bene Gesserit, knowing that they have such powers, and that they are using them to puppet things from the shadows. Early in the story, Paul's youth and innocence is on full display. When Gurney Halleck tries to get him to train, his reply is,
Guess I'm not in the mood today.
I think this shows that despite knowing about his family's history and their long feud with the Harkonnens, Paul has yet to experience any of that himself. He has lived a largely privileged life up to this point, and so he does not yet fully understand the cruelty of the world, and that he may have to fight at a moment's notice, mood or not. Further evidence that Paul is still green is that he himself has yet to actually meet a Harkonnen. He has been raised to see the Harkonnens as the enemy, with those close to him like Gurney emphasizing the brutality and incredible violence that they are capable of.
You never met Harkonnens before. I have. They're not human, they're brutal!
For the time being, Paul's worldview is simple enough, and it mirrors the audience's initial thoughts. Atreides equals good, Harkonnens equals bad. With Paul's powers awakening, he finds himself the focus of the Bene Gesserit. The Reverend Mother, Mahaim, comes to Caladan to assess Paul as a prospect and give him the Gom Jabbar test. She is immediately displeased with what she sees, as Paul proves himself difficult to control.
Defiance in the eyes, like his father.
Paul is reluctant to just go along with things without any explanation. When the Reverend Mother dismisses Lady Jessica, Paul is affronted by the way his mother is being ordered around.
You dismissed my mother in her own house.
With Paul not immediately falling in line, the Reverend Mother uses the voice on him to try and regain the power, showing Paul there is more than one way for the Bene Gesserit to make you do what they want. Paul is incensed about the voice being used on him, reluctant to give the Reverend Mother what she wants.
How dare you use the voice on me?
It is only when reminded that Paul told his mother he would do as he was bade, does he put his hand in the box. Even in passing the test, controlling his base impulses and enduring the pain, Paul still refuses to bow to the power of the Bene Gesserit, staring down the Reverend Mother as he faces the challenge, rebelliousness etched on his face. Paul's passing of the test is a mixed bag for the Reverend Mother. On the plus side, Paul has shown himself to possess the necessary restraint, and also has the burgeoning abilities of the Kwisatz Haderach. However, the visit also makes it clear that Paul will be extremely difficult for the Bene Gesserit to control, as he showed defiance throughout the entirety of their meeting. He poses great promise, but equally great danger. If anything, Paul's abilities, coupled with his resistance to the Bene Gesserit commands, makes Lady Jessica's deviation from the plan feel all the more bitter for them. When the Atreides arrive on Arrakis, Paul is greeted by the Fremen and chants of Lisan al-Gaib. The Lisan al-Gaib is different from the Kwisatz Haderach, in so much as the former is something created so that the Bene Gesserit could control and influence the people of Arrakis, whereas the latter is the super being that they have been looking to create for centuries. The myths of the Lisan al-Gaib were fabrications by the Bene Gesserit, to be used when necessary to control the population. The prophecies have no real meaning beyond what the people give them. When Paul learns about the Lisan al-Gaib, his dislike of the Bene Gesserit only grows, as he feels like they have brainwashed an entire planet. He feels like these people are being taken advantage of, preying on their circumstances to manipulate them into a tool to be used. He doesn't want a part of this myth, or to feed into these superstitions. Before the Atreides ever set foot on Arrakis, the plans for their downfall had already been made. Paul manages to escape the massacre alongside his mother Jessica, but they find themselves alone in the desert. The fall of House Atreides for Paul means the end of the life he knew. His father was killed, betrayed by the Emperor that he came to Arrakis to serve. He is left to wonder about the fate of all those he had come to love. He is heartbroken by his loss, knowing that his family was betrayed and that he was left to die. The death of his father and betrayal of his house is what sets Paul down an entirely different path than the one he imagined for himself. With spice being a psychoactive stimulant, and with Paul being regularly exposed to it on Arrakis, his visions start to come more frequently. Some of his visions are murky, only giving him bits and pieces, while others are crystal clear, like how he knows that his mother is pregnant again. Paul's visions allow him to see possible futures, which crush him under the weight of their enormity. The most powerful vision Paul has is of the Holy War. He sees a future where war is raged across the galaxy, a fanatical legion leading the charge as they shout his name.
I see a holy war spreading across the universe like unquenchable fire. A warrior religion that waves the Atreides banner in my father's name.
He is at the center of this war, with his decisions leading to its cause. He is devastated, feeling immense guilt for things that haven't even come to pass yet. His fear is palpable as he struggles to try and find a way to avoid the things that he has seen. He is not only changed by his visions, but he must try and move forward whilst fighting against fate's current. Even though he wants to avoid the Holy War, there is still conflict in Paul, as he wants to avenge his father's death. His grief and feeling of betrayal are all encompassing, as he wishes to see the Emperor answer for what he did. His father's ducal signet serves as a reminder to Paul the wrongs that were done to his family. Paul wants to avenge his father without triggering the Holy War. So the question becomes, how far down the path of revenge can he walk before the Holy War becomes an inevitability? He decides to seek out the Fremen in part to get answers to his visions, but also as a means of continuing his father's initial goal of aligning with them. In the aftermath of House Atreides' fall, he is reunited with Duncan Idaho, only to be blocked off as his beloved mentor dies. Earlier, Paul had a premonition of Duncan's death, with a feeling that if he was there, Duncan would have lived. With Paul failing to be there for Duncan, moving forward, I think he takes the protection of his loved ones even more seriously, as he is willing to actively put their well-being above everyone else. When on the run from the Harkonnens, and with the Liet Kynes, Paul lays out his plans for the future. He wants to warn the other great houses of what's happened on Arrakis, and to try and unite them against the Emperor. He also plans on marrying the Emperor's daughter, to bring some order to the chaos a war would create. When Kynes offers him pushback to this idea, he tests the waters a bit in using the Bene Gesserit propaganda to help him achieve his goals.
Fremen speak of the Lisan al-Gaib, a voice from the outer world who will lead them to paradise. I've seen your dream.
He is willing to push the envelope in a few situations when he is desperate enough. It may seem a small thing in the moment, but these micro decisions eventually lead him down a path that he can no longer turn away from. One of the most interesting aspects of the story is Paul's relationship with Jamis. Paul sees visions of possible futures where Jamis and him are friends. In these visions, Jamis is helping Paul learn to live in the desert and understand the way of the Fremen. He is able to use these future visions to help him in the present. When Paul and Jessica eventually run into the Fremen, Jamis included, things don't go how he was hoping. After some initial hostility from the Fremen, it seems things are settling down, and Paul and Jessica will be allowed to join them. However, Jamis will not abide by such a thing. He sees them as outsiders, and doubts Paul's potential as the Lisan al-Gaib. Jamis challenges the Atreides, and Paul steps up to fight him. During their fight, Paul is besting Jamis, but avoids killing him, trying to get him to yield instead. However, Fremen culture can be merciless at times, as the only way for the fight to end is for one of them to die. Paul is in a tough situation, as he feels like he has grown close to Jamis based on his future visions, and he wants to see those moments become real. To him, Jamis is a friend and a guide, and losing him in this moment would hurt. Paul has also never killed anyone before, so the weight of this death will be especially hard for him to bear. The tragedy of this moment is that if a few things were different, if Duncan hadn't died and was still with them, they might not have been received with the same hostility. If Jessica had announced herself as a sister of the Order before besting Stilgar, Jamis could not have issued his challenge as leader. But alas, things went the way that they went, and Paul is forced with a choice to either kill Jamis or to die, and in doing so, condemning his mother and unborn sister to the same fate. Paul still wants to live, and he wants his family to live, and so, however reluctant it may be, Paul kills Jamis. Just before he kills Jamis, there is a flash of the Holy War, signaling that a path towards it has been cemented. I don't think Paul realizes that in this moment, and the path he took to get there is not one he wished to walk, but he walked it all the same, a slave to his fate.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures, all at once.
Picking up from where we left in part 1, Paul and Jessica are doing their best to integrate themselves within the Fremen. With news of Paul's victory over Jamis spreading, along with other details that would allow the devout to see the Lisan al-Gaib, the Fremen camp is split. Half already believe him to be the Lisan al-Gaib, while the other half either don't believe the prophecy or are not yet convinced. Paul reminds us of his plans for revenge, despite his mother telling him it's not something his father would want.
Your father didn't believe in revenge.
Hell, I do.
Paul dipped his toes in using the prophecy to his advantage with Kynes, but in the siege, he tells Jessica that they need to convince the non-believers so that they will aid him in his war against the Harkonnens. Jessica fully commits to this idea, especially after she drinks from the water of life. However, despite his words, Paul still rebels against the prophecy, his feelings of disgust concerning it still prevalent. He actively tells Stilgar and Chani, among others, that he isn't the Messiah.
I'm the Messiah. I'm not the Mahdi.
I think he does this as a way to fight against his visions. He also grows to love and respect the Fremen, Stilgar and Chani chief among them, and so he does not want to lie and manipulate them by using this Bene Gesserit propaganda against them. Ironically, him publicly rejecting the idea that he is the Lisan al-Gaib works to build his reputation as such. Those hardcore believers take it as a sign that he is too humble to declare himself the Messiah. Therefore, he must be the Messiah. No matter what he says, they think he is the Lisan al-Gaib. For the non-believers, Paul denouncing the idea that he is the Lisan al-Gaib allows them to accept him into their siege, as they don't see him as someone trying to use them for his own gain.
Nezi Hajega, Giftak. Let me fight beside you. That's all I'm asking.
It allows him to come across as genuine in his desire to learn their ways and help in their fight against the Harkonnens. This isn't some 3D chess move Paul is doing to manipulate everyone. I think he is authentic in his rejection. However, it still serves to set the path that will allow his rise to power later on. He is drawn to Chani, the literal girl of his dreams.
It's indescribable what that feeling would be of a proximity of physical attraction in dream form that comes with a terrible purpose. It comes with very intense actualization. So I think Chani represents all those things to him.
She treats him as a friend rather than a messiah. She gives Paul a sense of normalcy and helps to integrate him into the Fremen way of life. She represents this idea that in Fremen culture, people are equal to one another. This is something that Paul desires, as he is looking for somewhere that he can belong, where he can feel supported and to be one of the many. However, in this, Paul is once again in conflict with himself. He is not a Fremen, but an outworlder hailing from Dukes. By trying to be equal to the Fremen, he is forced to reject his family's heritage, something that is very difficult for him to do, as it would mean leaving his family unavenged. Also, as he slowly grows to be more respected as a leader among the Fremen, he separates himself more and more from the ranks of the many. He eventually rises so high that he is all alone, everyone looking up to him instead of alongside him.
They used to be friends. Now they're followers.
Paul's relationship with Stilgar is also interesting because Stilgar almost becomes a surrogate father to him. Stilgar takes Paul under his wing and tries to help him prove himself to the other Fremen. Stilgar believes Paul to be the Lisan al-Gaib, so some of his motivation is clouded by this, but nonetheless, he treats Paul well, and Paul wishes to repay that kindness. Paul has to prove himself to the Fremen people. He does his job and follows orders, joining Fremen raids to sabotage Harkonnen's spice collection. He rises to every challenge he is faced with, using the combat skills he learned from Gurney and Duncan to show the Fremen his value as a fighter. He puts his life on the line time and time again to help the Fremen, showing them his bravery and winning their respect. His family's history and knowledge of the Harkonnen military tactics helps to elevate his importance to the Fremen's resistance, giving them a tactical advantage they never had before. He proves himself to be a good leader, and each time he proves his quality, more and more of the Fremen are won to his side, looking to him as a figure of hope. They name him Fedaykin, and he takes the name Muad'Dib, meaning sand mouse, or the one who points the way. Since arriving on Arrakis, Paul has had a fascination with these sand mice, and by choosing such a meaningful name, people are even more convinced of his holiness. He passes the final test and rides a sandworm, which just so happens to be a grandfather worm, making his feat even more impressive. During his time with the Fremen, Paul seems to reach a sort of contentment. He removes his father's ring and puts it in his pocket as he says,
Father, I found my way.
I think this is significant in that for the time being, Paul's quest for revenge is paused. He believes he matters to the Fremen, and he feels he belongs, finding his way as a leader in the process, something he wasn't sure he would be able to do. His burgeoning relationship with Chani, and having grown accustomed to life with the Fremen, Paul is confident in his place for the time being. However, a few key factors quickly change the state of things. The first is that he has almost proved himself too capable, with his legend as Muad'Dib, the Fremen freedom fighter, growing so large that more and more are starting to see him as their messiah. This is reinforced by his mother fanning the flames and indoctrinating people into believing that he is the Lisan al-Gaib. He is surrounded by people, but he's starting to feel isolated and alone. Another key factor is the return of Gurney Halleck. If Paul had paused his quest for revenge, fearing that rallying the fundamentalists to his side would push him too far on the road to the Holy War, Gurney is still biting at the bit for revenge. He is like the devil on Paul's shoulder, telling him that revenge, something that Paul genuinely wants, is right within his grasp. He only needs to reach out and take it. He encourages Paul to use the Fremen prophecy even more, fully committing to the role of Lisan al-Gaib. Paul is reluctant to do so. He knows that if he heads south, he will gain control, and because he fears this, he chooses not to act.
All my visions lead to horror. Billions of corpses scattered across the galaxy, all dying because of me.
The final straw that forces his hand is Feyd-Rautha's appointment to Arrakis. Feyd-Rautha's new tactics sent the Fremen reeling, forcing them to head south to regroup and have a war council. Because Paul has made himself so essential to the Fremen war effort, they demand he go south and speak at the meeting. Paul's visions have told him that if he goes south, the Holy War is all but certain, and now he feels like everything is working against him, forcing him down a path he doesn't want to go down. But try as he might, Paul has been walking down this path for some time now. He seeks Jamis in his visions to help him make his decision. Paul's visions are still fragmented, not giving him the full picture to see the way forward. Jamis tells him that he needs to see, and the only way to do so is to go south. Knowing that going south will result in damaging his relationship with Chani and potentially lead to the deaths of millions, he reluctantly accepts his fate and goes south. Once he's made his decision, he commits to it, drinking the water of life upon his arrival. The water of life expands his mind, allowing him to gain a perfected version of his prescience, giving him the full picture, past, present, and future. He experiences all these timelines at once. The weight of this knowledge has a deep effect on him, as after he has reawakened, he almost feels like a different person. There's a distance created between him and everyone else, as he has reached a level of enlightenment that no one else is capable of achieving. Processing all of this information, he becomes much colder, no longer showing his emotions like he did before. Paul also learns that him and his mother are descended from Harkonnens, with Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, the man who he is seeking revenge on, is his grandfather. This fundamentally changes the worldview he had earlier in the story. He was taught that Harkonnens were evil, brutal monsters capable of extreme violence. Growing up as an Atreides, he always saw himself as the opposition to the Harkonnens and what they stood for. But with this new revelation, it forces him to question how he sees himself. He realizes it's not a matter of good versus evil, but something far more complex. He could deny this truth or accept it, and use it to forge the difficult road ahead.
We're Harkonnens, so this is how we'll survive. By being Harkonnens.
With his perfected prescience, Paul sees that at this point, the Holy War is all but inevitable. If he were to die now, he would be a martyr, and the Holy War would go on anyway. He decides that the best available path that remains to him is to no longer avoid the Holy War and instead walk into it head first. In his mind, if he accepts this fate and he himself leads the way forward, he will be best able to guide the path towards the least objectionable outcome. Is it better to be directly responsible for the deaths of billions rather than to be passively responsible for the deaths of hundreds of billions? By this point, there are no good options, and the only thing left for Paul to do is to walk towards his fate. His path has become clear. Where Paul was once reluctant to use the Bene Gesserit propaganda, using the Fremen for his own means and declaring himself the Lisan al-Gaib, a religious figure he knows to be a fabrication, he now boldly proclaims himself the Messiah, the answer to all of these people's prayers. He takes complete control of the Fremen people, rejecting their traditions because they don't suit what he wants. Only leaders can speak at the Fremen War Council, and so he must kill Stilgar if he wishes to speak. But he rejects this. He wasn't able to stop killing Jamis because of tradition, but he's not going to let that happen again. Paul is unwilling to let Stilgar die because of how much he cares for him, and with Stilgar being one of the most devout amongst Paul's followers, he is destined to be one of the most brutal in future conflicts. How many does Paul condemn to death by refusing to kill Stilgar? In his speech to the Fremen, he mentions fear twice.
Alikakari! Hurai! Jahaish!
In Dune, we know that fear is the mind killer, leading people astray and preventing them from thinking properly. By using fear to gain control, Paul is effectively killing the Fremen's ability to act in their own self-interest. He coerces them into believing that he is the Lisan al-Gaib. He preys on their fear that if they are wrong, they are condemning themselves thousands more years of tumult in the deserts of Arrakis, when a green paradise could be possible.
Nata Jahash. Shihochausich.
He uses his abilities as Kwisatz Haderach to further convince them, and once he has fully won their hearts and minds, he shows his hand.
I am Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, Duke of Arrakis!
Him taking out his father's ring is him saying that revenge is very much back on the menu. He leads the Fremen to liberation from the Harkonnens, and in the process enslaves them to the legend of the Lisan al-Gaib. Baiting the Emperor into coming to Arrakis, Paul uses the Fremen to overwhelm Arrakeen, allowing him control of what comes next. With the Great Houses as his audience, Paul becomes fully unleashed. He tells Chani he loves her, right before swooping in and asking Princess Aurelian to marry him. He is making good on his initial plan from part 1. He is going to overthrow the Emperor while marrying his daughter to bring some peace to the chaos. This is a massive betrayal to Chani, but it is not something that Paul necessarily wants to do, but something that he thinks is required of him in order to thread the narrow way through.
And what will require so much of him, his immediate desire to love and be loved with Chani, will be superseded by this responsibility.
He is proving himself to be as difficult to control as the Bene Gesserit feared, as he threatens to blow up the spice fields and uses the voice on the Reverend Mother. I think his dislike of the Bene Gesserit has grown something close to hatred since he last saw Mohiam, as he at least partially blames their manipulating of the situation to lead them to where they currently are. Paul takes the responsibility of facing the Emperor's champion Feyd-Rautha for his own. He says it's his burden to bear, and yes, the fight specifically is, but on a bigger scope, the foreknowledge of what's to happen, as well as trying to guide it, is also his burden. Throughout the fight, he pounds his chest, just as Jamis did during their fight, showing that Paul still carries his friend and everything he taught with him. He bests his cousin and has the Emperor bow before him, kissing his father's ring. He has seemingly achieved everything he set out to do after his life fell into chaos, and yet it is only the beginning, as he knows that his future is still full of more death and destruction as the Holy War begins. When he tells Stilgar to lead them to paradise, he does not look like someone who has just achieved a great victory. Rather, he looks like a man defeated, resigned to his fate. In his battle with destiny, Paul has lost, and just as he seemingly achieved everything he initially set out to do, avenging his father, freeing the Fremen from the plight of the Harkonnens, he has also seen horrors that he hoped to avoid come into being. Paul's dream of belonging, to be part of a group, part of a family of equals, could not be farther from his new reality. In the eyes of many, he is the Lisan al-Gaib, this mythic figure that is so high above the average person that he is a prophet that should be worshipped. People he cares about no longer see him as himself, but as this Messiah, something that he knows to be a falsehood, designed to manipulate them. He has had to sell parts of himself in order to carry out this falsehood. His abilities as the Kwisatz Haderach have made him singular, the only person who can point the way. This has become his burden, a burden that no one else can truly understand or comprehend, leaving Paul completely isolated. He has millions of followers, but they all stand behind him, as Paul must walk this treacherous path on his own. The weight of everything he has had to go through, and the weight of everything that is yet to come, threatens to crush Paul beneath it all.
Lead them to paradise.
Paul is such an interesting character for so many reasons. His character is multifaceted, and a sense of duality surrounds him. He is the son of a duke and a Bene Gesserit. He is an off-worlder and a Fremen. He is an Atreides and a Harkonnen, a hero and a villain. Through experiencing immense hardships, Paul is transformed from the innocent boy we first meet to someone so consumed and burdened by the weight of everything that he can either continue to move forward no matter the cost or crumple beneath it all. Paul in many ways acts like an upstanding person that cares deeply for his loved ones and will follow his moral code as best he can. However, he is at war with fate itself, as it seems like the universe is conspiring against him to walk down a path that leads to death and destruction. He is a tragic figure that, paired with his hubris and cursed by fragments of the future without the full picture to understand things until it is too late, he unwittingly leads the world down the path he was desperately trying to avoid. He resents what he is forced to become, as well as those whose conspiring led to his creation. Paul is such a complex character, and I think there are so many ways to interpret him and the things that he does. Everyone sees something different in Paul, and whether it be hero, villain, or something else entirely, I think there is no denying that he is an interesting character. For all of these reasons, in my opinion, Paul Atreides is the best character in Dune. If you somehow made it to the end of the video, I want to thank you for watching. I've heard that Paul's character only continues to grow and evolve even more in the next entry in the series, but I just couldn't wait to make this video. Perhaps a part 2 when Dune Messiah is eventually released. If you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. It really helps out the channel. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.